Ich beginne. Hi and welcome everyone. My name is Menina Chal. I'm part of the SAP community team, your host for today's community call. And as you can see, we're here to talk about discover event-driven integration with SAP. And I have two experts here with me, which are Carsten Strothmann, product manager at SAP, and Jens Christoph Nolte, chief development architect at SAP. They both will talk about this topic and of course are here to answer your questions. So I can already see in the chat that we have a wish from you or one of you to address a certain aspect, which we'll certainly do. So please feel welcome to interact, use the chat and let us know your thoughts and your questions that we can address. With that, I'm happy to hand over to Carsten to kick it off.
Perfectly. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Well, what do we want to do today? We want to do two things. First of all, we would like to introduce event-driven architectures to you, and second of all, we'll do a deep dive into events getting exposed from the S/4HANA side as an event source. Christoph will do that later on. I will get started now with an introduction there. As for myself, I'm a product manager in Walldorf. I do focus on Event Mash and on event-driven architectures in general. And well, this is the entire SAP ecosystem. You will hear that term quite often today because it's not just the event broker. It's not just the event source. It's all the different pieces playing together. And well, how are we going to achieve this? I would like to start with event-driven architecture, the motivation. Why would you go for event-driven architectures, the basics and the concepts behind, and the benefits and challenges. Then I will switch over to the big picture of SAP's event-driven ecosystem, look at a few event sources. It's not just S/4HANA, so I would like to go a little bit broader there. We'll look at a few use cases and an example. What can you do with those event-driven integrations? And then I will hand over to Christoph, who is going to deep dive into S/4HANA and the events getting exposed from that backend. And later on, we'll have time for a Q&A and a quick discussion. So if you have questions, please go ahead and share those in the chat. Before we go there, well, we all want to become an intelligent enterprise, at least the companies that we work for. And well, where are we in respect to event-driven architectures? There's the business technology platform here. And this is basically the transport layer and one of the consuming layers for event-driven architectures. And then we are on this level right there with the business applications being the primary event sources at SAP. And with that said, let's dive into event-driven architecture. And I would like to start by going back to my vacation. My last vacation, I always like going back there, obviously. Nevertheless, the start was a little bit rocky. We decided due to the current COVID restrictions, you know how hard it is to travel, to wait until the last minute because my son needed to get tested. We didn't want to take any risks there. So tested him the night before we wanted to fly, and I went to a website and tried to book the package trip for pretty much insurance reasons and because it was simply easier. That didn't work out very well. I went through the entire process several times, and what those super last minute websites do, they book flights, they go for hotel capacity, and in the end they merge all of that together, and it looked like their data was not up to date. So I went through the entire process, put in my credit card data, and the bookings failed several times. I still got it done. I was not very happy with them. Still, I picked up the phone and called them, and we got it done on the phone. Nevertheless, they had a problem with their real-time data. There was something that they did very well, though. On the trip, they had real-time information in a number of situations. So the gate where our flight was supposed to leave from we got a text message to get informed about that. When we arrived at the airport, they told us specifically in real time where the bus was waiting. And on the way back, our flight got delayed. So we got informed ahead of time. So we were able to relax a little bit and not to hurry too much to make it to the airport. So you see the benefits and the disadvantages if you don't have real time, the benefits of having real time information, the disadvantages when the data is outdated. And this is one of the big advantages of event-driven architectures. Something happens, you get informed about this change immediately. Let's look at the concepts behind, and I usually like to explain these concepts with an example out of nature, a spider's web. The spider's web can be seen as an event broker, and the spider here can be seen as the event consumer. So it sits typically not in the middle of the spider's web. Spiders sit on the side. They wait for changes, for significant changes, events to occur in the spider's web. So a bug ending up in the spider's web would be a significant change. A leaf ending up in the spider's web would be an event, a significant change. Now, one of these events the spider cares about, and that's probably the bug, and it's going to react. So you've already seen a few of the important terms here. An event is a significant change. There are notification events. This is what's happening here. The spider just gets informed that something has ended up in the spider's web and then evaluates whether it is going to react. Event broker, here in this example, it's a spider's web. In the real world, it's going to be Event Mash. And there are event consumers. They, in the end, wait for events to occur to take action. What you see down here is an event originating from an S4 system. A business partner got changed, and this is actually a notification event. You can see that the section holding the data is very small. You just have the ID of the business partner there and nothing else. That is one concept. There's another kind of event, data events. Data events hold the entire data that is required. On the next slides, we will see what that means, what difference that makes. Point here is data events are a lot bigger already, and they really contain the data. Quick point here. I'm putting activity and notification events up here. The backend colleagues typically talk about activity events, so I will stick to that later during the presentation. Christoph is going to stick to that. There's a different terminology, notification events, that we typically use on the Event Mash side. It means the same thing. Now, let's look at an activity event. It contains minimal data. Looking at this graphic here, there's the SAP backend, there's a business object in the SAP backend. Let's say it's the business partner. The business partner gets changed. So an event is raised, there's Event Mash, there is the SAP BTP, and there is an extension application on the BTP. It could be an integration as well. What happens now? Event gets raised. It gets transported via Event Mash. And if we want to be specific, this is the description of the event. The actual event had occurred here. It gets described and transported, and then it gets consumed by the extension application. And now, since this is an activity event, the extension application is going to calculate, going to think through whether it cares about the event or not. If it cares, it's going to do an API call back. If not, it is just going to ignore the event. The API call is going to provide the additional data needed to continue working on that event. Why is this so nice? Well, you have one advantage here, a big one. You're using the authentication and the authorization of the backend system. So the data is protected. That's a major advantage there. On the other hand, you have this additional step required when receiving the event. There's the second type of event. That's a data event. Data events contain the full data set, or at least the required data set of a business object. And let's look at it. Event occurring, business partner got changed, sales order got created. I'm trying to indicate that this event is a lot bigger. It gets transported to the integration or the extension there, gets consumed. There's no additional call needed. So that's the advantage. So quickly to summarize this, the advantages of a data event are that all the data is included there. It's good for use cases in which the full data set is required in the majority of cases, because then you do skip this additional API call. There are a few challenges. So the event is a lot bigger. You lose control potentially of some sensitive data. So you want to watch this there. So it raises topics like data access and protection. And obviously there's a higher resource consumption on the source side, on the consumer side, and even on the event broker side. And to jump ahead, the pricing for Event Mash, for example, is consumption-based. So these things you can take into account. In respect to the activity events, those are very small. The controlled data access is an advantage. Nevertheless, there's this additional synchronous step required, depending on the number of required API calls to fetch the additional data. That can either be very efficient or inefficient. So you have to see if you have 100 calls and you just need, or if you have 100 events and you just need one call back, that is a very efficient approach, obviously. So you have to see what the balance is in respect to events and API calls. And yeah, you always need a suitable API, obviously. Otherwise, you can't execute on that call. On top of that, you do have some additional configuration for the API access instead of just setting up the events there. Let's step back. Benefits and challenges of event-driven architectures. The main thing, and this is the first thing people see in respect to the benefits, is real time. You get informed of a change in the backend system immediately, whether it is another backend system that's consuming, or whether it's a BTP consuming, or even a backend of another vendor consuming. In real time, you get those updates. So it allows for new kinds of integrations there. On top of that, flexibility and scalability. Rewiring event-driven architectures is really easy. On top of that, the scalability, there's some buffering that comes with Event Mash. So peak loads are handled well. What I really like about event-driven architectures from a development perspective is this incremental growth option, meaning you start with software components and click in more software components, consuming the events or producing the events. So that's very nice in respect to DevOps, in respect to improved quality as well. Fault tolerance, if you apply suitable patterns. If one consumer fails, the others are not impacted. And quite important, cloud events, a common approach driven forward by a number of vendors like SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, and so on, describing events in a common format like the OData of events, if you want to do that comparison. This goes beyond vendor boundaries. So it brings different IT worlds together. So you can consume SAP events on the Microsoft side and Microsoft events on the SAP side. Challenges. All of this is happening in parallel. And there are lots of events. If you think about how many events an SAP backend could expose, that's quite some. Think about all the changes happening there. So monitoring and understanding what's going on in an event-driven landscape is not necessarily easy. Tracing and debugging, if things go wrong, is certainly more difficult than in traditional landscapes. And that's just all due to the parallel nature of event-driven architectures. And data security, obviously, you have to watch specifically with data events there. Let's switch to SAP's event-driven ecosystem. We do think that it's very important to have this end-to-end setup. So there are event sources, there's the eventing infrastructure, and then there are event consumers. If you look at the left-hand side at the event sources, S4HANA, S4HANA Cloud are event-enabled. I think Christoph will go into the details later on. Nevertheless, you can provide notification events with certain options for S/4HANA. You can currently already provide data events. For ERP, there is an add-on that you can use to provide notification and data events there. SuccessFactors exposes both data and notification events. We're reusing the intelligent services events there, so there are plenty of events so that you can adjust yourself. Marketing Cloud is event enabled using the S/4HANA approach, and obviously you can use third-party events as well. In respect to the eventing infrastructure, you have Event Mash as the event broker as a service. I will talk about Event Mash in a minute in detail. There are event routing services, so taking the events from Event Mash and moving them into Microsoft Azure, for example. So this is something we're working on. There's currently a customer engagement initiative going on, and extending the mesh there is highly important. And then there are event catalogs, because you need to be able to look up what events are available. So api.sap.com holds the event for S/4HANA, for example. And plenty of event consumers. The one that is probably most important from an integration perspective is the integration suite. So the integration suite is event enabled there, but not only, extension suite as well. Certain backends using the add-on can consume inbound events as well. So on the backend side, you can react to events raised from other backends there. Project Kima, our serverless environment there, is event enabled. So lots of options here to bring things together end to end. Event Mesh is a fully managed cloud service for enabling applications to communicate through events in an asynchronous fashion. The idea here is to make it as easy as possible. So we're talking about an event broker as a service, and it basically is the infrastructure connecting the event sources and the event consumers there. It scales well. There's a low entry barrier. It grows with your needs. The pricing is traffic based, so you pay only for what you use. There are different quality of service levels, up to at least once. If you want to go one step further, you can use it together with the integration suite and will get exactly once. Real-time transport, obviously. And that's a very important point. We are open and focused at the same time. What does that mean? Well, we're supporting the standard protocols, MQTT, AMQP, REST, and so on. So very open, and the event broker has to be open in general, because as said, it's going to break down vendor boundaries there. Nevertheless, at the same time, we're focused on SAP's event-driven ecosystem. So we want SAP backends, BTP applications to have an additional benefit as well. One example there is if you deploy a CAP application that uses Event Mesh, the queues in Event Mesh are automatically created. So there are some advantages when using the SAP ecosystem. Nevertheless, we're still completely open, following the open standards there. What would you want to do with event-driven architectures in the integration arena? Well, one thing is obvious: replicating data from an SAP backend to the BTP, or potentially to another backend, like a ticket I was presenting together with the customer. The customer had been doing replication from S4 and from S4 and by design to a Salesforce system, bringing the systems together there. Real time obviously is a big point there. The vendor boundaries really goes beyond those boundaries. Data enrichment: you fire an event, you add additional data to that. New channels: you could consume those events via channels that are not the typical components from where you would access SAP systems. Smart triggers: you have an event and that does trigger a workflow, and before triggering the workflow, you potentially collect data using the data enrichment approach from other systems. On the side, in respect to extensions, there are new user groups. That's a typical scenario. So people that you don't necessarily want to access your backend systems, or that simply can't do that, or quick innovations, meaning you don't want to go through the quality processes of your backend systems, or don't want to try things out in the backend. You want to try things out quickly on the BTP and develop extensions that are connected in real time to the backend systems. The diagram here is quite, or the slide is quite correct in respect to integrations and extensions. Most customers currently still go for integrations. I believe in future, these extensions will build on the integrations as well. Let's look at a very quick example here. A SuccessFactors system. A new employee gets hired. That's an intelligent services event of SuccessFactors. This event gets raised, and via Event Mash, via CPI, via open connectors, what happens is this event triggers 3 things. First of all, sending a welcome email to the newly hired, welcome to the company, a Slack message to the team, hey, there's a new employee joining, look at these skills, and so on. And on top of that, we're triggering the replication of user data to a third-party HR application. So all of these things get kicked off by the event. And I think now Christoph will take over, and he will deep dive into S/4HANA and give you some more background there.
Thank you, Carsten. So I'll take over the sharing. And now let's look at events from an S/4HANA perspective. The whole strategy, of course, is very much depends on the event content and the support of the backend systems to get actual business events into the infrastructure where they can be consumed and used. And I'll start to talk about where to use events, and also a little bit where not to use events from an S/4HANA perspective. We have released events from S/4HANA with the primary use case of side-by-side process extensions. This is for now, for the time being, our main use case. What are side-by-side process extensions? As you know, in S/4HANA Cloud, you're very limited. Of the access to the S/4HANA system is very strict, only through defined APIs, interfaces. Extensibility is also, compared to on-premise and ECC, very strictly limited. We, as a provider of the S4 system, have to give customers additional extension points. And one very important extension point, we believe, are events. Something has happened and you want to trigger off an extended process. The second use case that is very often connected with events is data distribution. We believe that MDI, the SAP Master Data Integration, is a better way, because it offers a lot of additional services like filtering, and provides services with data protection and so on. So that may be, for many complex use cases, a better alternative. If you need to replicate large amounts of data, the CDI is an alternative, which are basically, from an S4 perspective, mass and delta enabled services that work nicely, where you can bulk import data, and which reduces maybe a little bit the pressure on your performance. But still, you may want to use business events, but probably only for more simple distribution scenarios, and also considering performance. Something that internally we are mostly looking at is process integration. It's, in a way, it's very similar to the first case, process extension, but it's SAP internal. We are using events to connect SAP internal applications. Subscription billing is a front runner which is a BTP application that integrates into S/4HANA using events. Already, we are already delivering that, and there's large interest in that area. So I see many additional scenarios following that way for SAP internal integration based on events. I'll come to that at the end of the presentation because that's a little bit forward-looking. To make things a little bit more complicated is that from a customer side, we see these strategic decisions to say, okay, we do everything with events. So somebody said there's a merger of event streaming and data store requirements. You basically want to fill your data stores using events. That is a customer requirement, but that has its challenges. We acknowledge that. And I'll come to that. At this point, we are not convinced that that is always the best answer to requirements in that area. So prime use case, side-by-side process extensions. You want to trigger a follow-on process on BTP or a connected platform. So, right. So to look in the future, we have to look back. We have had event-like mechanisms already in SAP ECC, maybe even in R2, and also in S/4HANA that are event-like. They are not all of them are really event mechanisms that provide asynchronicity and asynchronous handling and publish subscribe. But we know these mechanisms, and we have been using them for ages already. This is not what I want to talk about because it's about exposing this to the cloud, to Event Mash. But all in all, this is not a completely new topic to S/4HANA and the related predecessors. So what are we doing in cloud now? What are our concepts for events in S/4HANA? We have a component that's called business event handling, and that's basically the concept, events for the cloud. We send events from S/4HANA to the Event Mesh, and this is exclusively to the Event Mesh. We connect through AMQP, through kernel-supported AMQP protocol, also MQTT. I'll get to the technical details a little later. And this is optimized to provide good performance and reliable message delivery or event delivery from S/4HANA to Event Mesh. We provide outbound events. So we are sending events from S/4HANA to Event Mesh for customers and other applications to consume. We also have for internally inbound processing. And I think back of the second slide with the disclaimer, but I think this will also be made available to customers. So it will be possible to receive events in S/4HANA and then trigger activities there. The main use case, as I said, is customer side-by-side extensibility. Additional use cases will be added. We have released this with the on-premise release 2020 and the related cloud release 2008. So this is out for more than a year. Now we had a Delta version available earlier, so you may find that in your release that was Delta and not supposed to be used for productive use. Primarily because when we look at the implementation, what we leverage for events is Cloud Events 1.0. The standard was only available for the 2020 release. We used the Cloud Events 0.2 standard before, but Cloud Events 1.0, this is for production. This is not S4, this is SAP. So all applications are asked to provide their events in this standard. S4HANA is doing so. What we have right now, what we provide are those activity events, and I put the notifications here because Carsten used that. So these activity events are, as Carsten pointed out, rather small. They contain the activity, the object type, the object ID, and maybe some filter criteria. So they are not completely empty. They may contain some additional data that can be used for filtering. So basically, this loop of receiving the event and then reading data can be enhanced by some filtering criteria, maybe based on the sales area for a sales order, where you say, okay, I'm only interested in a certain sales area, and I do not have to go back and read additional data if I already see in the event that this is not the sales area I'm interested in. I also have an example of the event on the next slide. Why do we do that? Again, this was pointed out, security reasons, data protection, privacy reasons. Those are complex questions that need to be answered. If you put a lot of data in these events, critical data, we try to avoid this currently. A big thing is also performance, right? As pointed out, events is always about performance. If you have a lot of events, and in S/4HANA we have a lot of potential event volume, there are some really big customers that have a lot of updates happening, and if you send complete objects, things can get ugly for the infrastructure. So we will definitely continue to support activity events. We had a question before in the chat already about data events or big events that contain the complete object. We are looking into that. We are planning that. I don't think we will have that in the 2022 release. We have the, and I'll show that later, we are putting the some technical foundation into the system to support data events, and there are questions that need to be answered, like performance. There may be limitations on what you can do on data privacy, protection and privacy. There will be some guidelines how you can handle that, also security-wise. And there are also things considered in the infrastructure to support these qualities. But this must work end-to-end. Otherwise, it doesn't. We cannot release that. So it's not just sending out the event. The whole thing just has to work, performance-wise, security-wise, DPP-wise. As pointed out, we had this send, receive, and read additional data loop. And our target is to provide events for all relevant objects. Relevant objects are right now objects that also have APIs. If the object is relevant, you'll have an API. If you have an API, you should have appropriate events for it. And we'll look at the content a little later. So this is an example of a business event, SalesOrder.Changed. This is the current release. You see the context, starting with the type attribute all the way to the content type. Those are generic attributes that are available in the infrastructure. We believe there will be additional attributes in the context added. Also application-specific context attributes that can then be used for filtering. We see the data, sales order. So for this is a sales order changed event. So we see the sales order ID. But we also see filtering criteria like sales order type, organization, and distribution channel. Again, this is a current release. I think this event was enhanced. So in your release, maybe there's less data still, but we're always working on this. Now, okay, this is a big slide, but I'm an architect, so I have to show it because it's architecture. Basically, for those of you technically inclined, what you can see here is that the business object, the application, the business object of the application sends an event into the event broker. There's a business event handling component that processes the event, pushes it to the enterprise event enablement component that does the communication, kernel-based communication, to the event mesh on the right, and connected to the event mesh on the right. You have other consumers like on-premise systems, other SAP systems, other non-SAP systems, or partner systems. I'm showing this basically as a contrast. This is what we have within the 21 architecture. The architecture is slightly changing, so this is something that will come with the next on-premise release. And this is rather relevant that we are integrating the event handling into the Restful ABAP programming model, which is a new programming model for ABAP that you may be familiar with for different extensibility purposes where it's already used. RAP supports extensibility, and the biggest feature that we get from RAP is extensibility. So you can create your own events, which is currently not possible. RAP will allow this. The communication component stays the same. And so from a consumption perspective, nothing really changes. The events will look the same. It doesn't make a difference, but we have extensibility in S/4HANA. And life has become a lot easier internally for me as an architect, and technically for the colleagues. So things are more stable, or not stable, more straightforward. Let's put it that way. Right. So we got through the architecture slides that may have looked a little bit scary, and talk about something that is always very interesting for customers, the biggest concern for our customers. How many events do we have? Since we do not have extensibility, you almost completely rely on the delivered content. In the current release, in the 22.02 release, so in the cloud release, we have 108 objects, business objects. They're called event objects on API Hub because that's more generic. But in S/4HANA perspective, the event objects are always business objects like batch, bill of material, as you can see here, billing document, request, or sales order, business partner, etc. And these objects have 346 events. Guidance is to create update events, also delete events if applicable. That there are a number of objects that cannot really be deleted, and also relevant status changes like a release or a blocking and so on. We have almost the same content on-premise and for cloud systems, slightly less on-premise. But by and large, everything I said is valid both for cloud and on-premise, and you can use it for both. You have access to the API Hub. I have the link down there. I guess you're familiar with that. And on the API Hub, you also have the link to the customer influence, where you as a customer can request additional events. So if events are missing, you can request them, and we have a process that should give you very quickly an answer, and also release date if the application agrees that the events make sense, and should be part of the standard. But that is also a good way from a customer perspective to drive this and to get more content. Right. So coming to close of my presentation, we have just an outlook for message-based integration. Very often we see that on customer side, events are used as more as messages rather than events. Messages are not events. Events have a publish subscriber approach. Messages basically know their receiver, where they are sent. We are looking into how far we can leverage the event infrastructure also to transport messages, but it's basically two different things. Messages require additional qualities. You need to have some receiver handling, configuration, and consistency of to make sure that the messages are truly delivered. Events are mostly fire and forget. You need other monitoring and error handling. But leveraging the event infrastructure may give us the general benefits of reuse. But that is always in the discussion that I have with customers, that very often gets mixed up. What is using events, using messages. We're looking into that, but right now we don't do that. And finally, I have to say that I said that we have no extensibility in the current solution that we're currently delivering, and our solution is available from 2020. Our business event handling is not available, for example, also in ECC. So to enable customers in ECC, there's a SAP NetWeaver add-on for event enablement, which is, I believe, software is free. I think there's a charge for volume charge on the Event Mash for that only. This add-on is now also available in S/4HANA. And we have it in S/4HANA basically as a migration target. So if you've used it in ECC, you can migrate to S/4HANA and continue to use it. It allows you in the current releases also extensibility. Basically, the idea of this add-on is to let customers build their own events, also large events, also data events. So if you need to build your own data events now, you can use the SAP NetWeaver add-on for event enablement. Yes, correct. Right. Okay. And so here is some key takeaways for integration. Integrate Intelligent Enterprise, basically some links you will find later when the presentation is made available for you. And then to the Q&A.
We get to Q&A now,
right? If you have any questions.
Yes, I have been watching the live chat a lot. There are lots of questions that came in, so thanks for the great questions. We jump right into it. But first of all, thanks Carsten and Jens Christoph for the detailed presentation, and of course covering the note that was added in the live chat prior to the call. Let me jump into Q&A. So there's an interest in how to troubleshoot events. And how can we troubleshoot if a message is not sent to Event Mash in SAP BTP? Maybe that's something you can cover on the topic of troubleshooting, but also that specific case for BTP.
And Christoph, you want to take that first from the S4 side? Because I mean that would be the first step.
Typically... Yeah, troubleshooting. Okay. What we have done and probably shouldn't do that going back here through the slides, but in S/4HANA, our solution, I'll do it anyway. If we look at the architecture, and it's not on this slide. Yes, it is on the slide. You see this little AIF box here. The application integration framework. This is the standard error handling component for integration, mostly used for inbound integration. So messages come in, cannot be processed, and we are also using this for events. So if anything happens, it shows up in AIF. If anything happens within S/4HANA, so if it breaks within the S/4HANA system, if it doesn't go out to the message, you have AIF to use it. And I think AIF is rather known in the integration space. And from then on, you take over.
Yeah, from that on, I would propose that we take those questions. I've seen a few more and I will use that as a trigger to come up with a block there. I think we can put that in a block. We can provide some detailed options on how to provide that. In general, there are a few things that you typically do. I mean, if you set up your end-to-end consumption there, I typically always add a test queue that I work with first, and. So there are a few steps. Proposal would be, we'll look into this and come up with a block, because that is going to help you way more than me just answering this high level here.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. I mean, you had published a blog post anyways on all questions that came in and tag it, right, on the session.
Yeah, that's the plan here. That's the plan here as well.
Yeah,
Yep.
but let's go through some more questions to see which ones can we cover in this call. Maybe to touch base on the security aspect on troubleshooting this.
Yeah, security is always, again, a broad topic. From an S4 perspective, you have to enable events here with a subscription manager. So events basically have to enable it on the S4 side. So they don't just go out of control. S4 has control which events are sent out. So within S4HANA, I think we have the S4HANA, the standard mechanisms that we have through integration. Also for inbound, those are the standard processes. And on Event Mash, yeah, maybe.
Okay. Thanks. Let me take another question here from the chat. Where is it? Yeah, how do we handle synchronous events where business objects are dependent?
That's a difficult one because this is actually not what the technology is built for. It's built for asynchronous communication. If you would ask me for an answer, I would put an app or a function in the middle that would then orchestrate. I mean, I think I had been talking about this example of triggering a smart trigger, of triggering a workflow. What we did there, we had a function in the middle, a serverless function. The event kicked off the function. It was collecting the data and then triggered the next thing. You obviously can use a similar approach for making sure that these steps are executed in sync, and you could actually go beyond and use this kind of as an orchestrator. I think I remember seeing that even as an event-driven pattern. So I would follow that approach. That's not supported by Event Mash by standard, though. The standard is really asynchronous.
Okay, another question here from Daniel. How will proper sequencing of events be covered?
Okay. Okay, the plan for sequencing is I mentioned that we are looking into an additional context attribute subject, which is a standard attribute. We want to put an object ID in there, and then we have sequencing on object level. So the events from whatever sales order 4711, they can be sequenced by the infrastructure because there's a timestamp, and the infrastructure knows, okay, this has to be grouped. The infrastructure will then learn to handle that to allow sequencing. At this point, end to end, you have no guarantee for an in-order processing. You basically have to cope with out-of-order processing. Sounds bad. Most use cases that are replication-like can live with that. Yeah, right. You have a timestamp, and so on. So yes, we're working on the sequencing. We want to do grouping based on object instance level, and then have sequencing by timestamp. But at this point, it's not. From an S4HANA perspective, the content is not there.
Okay. And then you showed only the notification event in S4HANA. Is the data event not available in S4HANA and S4HANA Cloud? No. Okay.
No. We will do that. We will do that based on the RAP. Yeah, this infrastructure. We need RAP to enable data events, but that will be post 2022.
Okay. Then let me take one of the questions here. Can't we send events from S4HANA 1909 on-premise at present without add-on?
Probably yes, but because the BEH component is available in 1909, and it will probably work, but with the next on-premise release with 2020, we change everything incompatibly. Because the 1909 is beta only. It's not for production, and it's mostly not for production because one thing is incompatible change. Everything is changed because we go to another to another standard or another version of the standard. And the second thing is there have been significant improvements in the infrastructure here in this enterprise event enablement in the XBE box regarding reliability and performance that are not available there. So 1909 is, you can play, but you cannot use it. You can play and learn a lot, but for production, we do not allow this for production.
Okay. Then there was another question more earlier raised. Can we only use the event mesh to can we use only the event mesh to subscribe to the event? And yeah, can we subscribe to these two event types from another software as a service? And if yes, how?
I think, Christoph, you can take it from the S4 side, and I will continue from there.
The S4 system uses the enterprise event enablement to talk to the event mesh, and this line only talks to the event mesh. So, of course, you always need the event mesh in an S4 context. You always need the event mesh. Yes.
Yes, and if you want to take it from there, obviously from the event mesh, you can forward the messages if needed, or the events if needed, using different mechanisms. For some other platforms, other environments, we will provide connectivity plans. Currently, we're working with Microsoft on connectivity into Microsoft Azure. We're doing the same there in respect to Solus. Nevertheless, if that connectivity is not there, you can use other ways of doing it using the typical messaging protocols. That's a little bit of you have to take some action there yourself. Nevertheless, it's possible. Mm-hmm. Still, Christoph's statement holds true. From S4, this has to go. The events have to go via Event Mash first.
Okay, thanks. Other question, is there an API to pull the event from the S4HANA and S4HANA Cloud when we don't want to use the event mesh from the SAP BTP?
That's not a good question because yes, actually, when we started, we had a pull-based approach. So there is an old service that allows this. That is this outbound queue here that you see. So it's all of these boxes have there. Makes sense, right? And that expose a pull service exactly as described. We are deprecating that for customers though. The pull service is very limited and and it does not support payload. We are not putting additional development in there. For us, the event story is a push story like this. Pull is there, it gets deprecated. You can probably find it on the API Hub, but I'm in the process of deprecating it and pulling it away. This is not the strategy we are following anymore. And I suspect we will also not create more content for that. So content is kind of frozen. So this is not really the way forward.
Okay. And then I see a question from Romana. Can we send bulk requests using events?
What is a bulk request? If the question is, can you send bulk data? At this point, no. The data is not bulk. There's no batching anywhere right now, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's not really. And again, this is not the approach there. If you're really thinking about initial data loads or really moving big amounts of data over to other platforms, there are other tools that are targeted at that. Events is really about significant changes and getting informed in real time on those. So it's not about loading initial data, really big data sizes. that's not the main target use case.
I mean, together with the previous question, pull, if you want to have large amounts and if you want to do pull, there's CDC. Look into CDC, CDI, CDS, change data capture, extraction use on the S4 side. There's delta handling. You can say, okay, give me all changes from the sales order of the last 10 minutes. You can subscribe to that. You can get that. That is a pull-based approach. That is also very, very good mass enabled. That's what I said. Events are not always the right solution. For example, for large scale data replication scenarios, it's worth looking into other solutions.
Okay, now there are lots of interaction in the chat, so thanks everyone for this. Is there any urgent question that you want to get addressed right now or get attention from Carsten and Jens Christoph? Then I'll have a look in chat right now to see if there's anything coming up urgent from you. Otherwise, as I already mentioned, we posted the link to the community where the blog post will be published. And oh yeah, I see one question. Let's take this one, okay? Or see if we can take it. So is there a way to prioritize events? For example, Prio 1 is always executed first, Prio 3 always last.
No, not in S4. No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Okay, and then to the previous question that you just replied to, there is now an additional follow-up comment just to make sure the person understood. So I'll just read it out loud from your explanation. I understand that the best way is to use the event mesh on SAP BTP and forward the event to other application systems, like for example for Salesforce.
Yes. If you want to connect to Salesforce, that is certainly the best way there. You have to go via Event Mesh, as said, for S4. As said, typically it's targeted to consuming from Event Mesh, obviously, and yes, then this is the answer. Okay,
good. Then I would say we close the session with Q&A. As I think we have
can I quickly jump in? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to rewind to the question before, to the priority of events. Okay. So there are no event priorities out of the box. If you think it's true, there might be ways of just doing that. You could subscribe to the topics on the S4 side and do topics subscription into different queues, and you could obviously have a high priority queue for some of the business objects and a medium priority queue for changes to business objects that are not that important. So you could build this, but it's not like there's an option, okay, this event is priority 1, priority 2, or priority 3. But there are means of using the existing features and the infrastructure appropriately for that.
Okay, thanks, Carsten, for the addition. Yeah, with that, I would really say now, thank you everyone for participating, for asking the questions, for tuning in. Carsten, Jens, Christoph, thanks for your time and also the presentation, detailed and answers, and of course, promising that we'll have a follow-up summarizing the Q&A in the blog post again. So that's why everyone that has additional questions, even after this call, go to SAP community and post your questions there. The community is there to help you, of course. With that, thanks again. Have a good rest of day. Hope to see you soon. Looking forward to your suggestions to any topics that you want to get covered in further community calls. Always open to hear your thoughts. Give us a thumbs up, and yeah, talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.